And now, I guess we should be live. So hopefully you can hear the sound of my voice. But welcome. It is October 28th, 2017, 10:07 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And because I've been thinking about this for a while, I actually wanted to have a discussion on this topic. Death before sin, or death and the fall. And thinking about with all of the wonderful things that science has blessed us with the opportunity of knowing, like general relativity and Big Bang cosmology and evolutionary theory. Where does Christian theology fit in with evolution, or where does evolution fit in with Christian theology? Because I know that the picture that the fundamentalist perspective of the Bible gives, compared to the view that world history gives us, is, they're two different pictures. And for anybody who is watching, if you want to join, just message me for the join link. There were more people who came in, and I guess they left out because before we started, I was listening to the Foo Fighters, so I don't think they like the Foo Fighters. So, hey MP, what's up? Hey General, what's up? Oh, you guys are muted. Hold on. Sorry.
Hey, what's going on, Wayne? I don't know if it's me or your mic sounds like really broken up, but it may be me. I don't know if General is hearing what I'm
hearing. Somebody said the same thing. Hold on.
Hey, yeah, I think your voice is a bit robotic.
Oh, all right. I'm going to check out and check back in.
Yeah, that's like Johnny Five. He's like Johnny Five. Does anybody even get that reference anymore when I say Johnny Five? Do you get that reference, General Hansen?
Nah.
You do not know who Johnny Five is?
Nope.
There was a movie called Short Circuit, and it was about a robot getting like a soul, and the robot's name was Johnny Five. And in pop culture from I think the end of the 80s to 95, it was Johnny Five was the robot.
Yeah, I was born in 88, so
okay. Yeah. How do I know?
You still sound like an android. Now you moved up from robot to android.
All right, hold on. Any better?
Yeah, you sound good now.
Okay. Finally. So I've been thinking about this for a couple of weeks now. Well, I will say last week my childhood friend, his mom died. His mom passed away. She had a long fight with breast cancer, and then it progressed, and she passed away. She passed away the week before last week. Her funeral was last week, and so I've been thinking about the whole death thing and Christianity again and blah blah blah. And it's a weird thing the way a lot of, I guess I'll say, religious fundamentalists or even people in general, it's a very odd thing, or it's a very odd way people look at death, because I don't see it necessarily as such a bad thing, as a Christian. Because I'll talk to other Christians and they'll say, oh, well, don't you know, death is the enemy and death is bad and blah, blah, blah. I actually would prefer to die than rather live forever with my body being brittled with diseases and body aches. So I don't know. I think it's a very gracious thing for God to allow us to die. I mean, imagine a world where Hitler lived forever. Not a good world.
But don't forget, Mother Teresa has to also die too, though.
Yeah, but what's the saying? It's like a few good lives to save us all 1,000, whatever it is. So I guess you could say it's for the better good. But either way, I don't see it as a terrible, evil thing.
But do you think Christianity doesn't find it to be a bad thing, or is it just like your personal opinion? Like, I would die.
It's a little of my personal opinion, but when it comes to Christian theology, I think in certain cases, it's contingent on certain circumstances. Like, for example, like in a sense where, you know, well, yeah, in a sense of killing somebody, right? And in a sense of murdering somebody, yeah, it's a bad thing. But in the sense of dying of old age, I don't think Christianity actually would have any contention with that. I think the problem is when people say death as far, because they relate it back to like the Genesis account, right? Like, oh my gosh, like God told Adam and Eve they were going to die. I think we need to understand that the death in Genesis is not the same type of death that Jesus had took a part of on the cross. The death in Genesis is a spiritual type of death, but I'm talking about a physical type of death. Like, yeah, like people should physically have the well, I was gonna say choice. That's another subject. I do think people should have the choice to die, but people should be blessed with the opportunity to die.
Well, hold on. I don't think anybody would doubt that Jesus's death was both physical and I'm not sure. I don't think he had a spiritual death. I think his death was physical. So I'm trying to wrap around what distinction you're trying to make, because from my standpoint, even though Jesus did die physically in his resurrection, that's what we celebrate, but that was a physical death.
Right. But some people, I think they will. There's some people who say he physically died, but he didn't physically resurrect and blah blah blah. But the whole point I was making is in the Genesis account, people think that after Adam and Eve disobeyed God, one of the views is that their punishment was to physically die. And so I'm saying, well, no, I think they would have died anyway. I think the type of death in the Genesis account is referring to a spiritual death. So
yeah, maybe what Wayne's trying to say is that.
Hold on, can I ask a quick question for Wayne? Wayne, I'll shoot out the link. Can you get the link?
Oh yeah. Do you have a link, or I'll give it to you in the side chat?
No, I'll give it to him. I'll give it to him. I'm sorry, General. Pardon my interruption.
Okay. Yeah, I think what Wayne's trying to say is that no matter who you are, I think every human, without exception, with varying degrees, have a sense of anxiety in regards to survival. So it's just a natural, thing that species try and do. Like when you look at, say, a lion chasing a deer or something, like the deer is not going to be like, oh, look at me, here's my chance to die, and it just sits there, unless maybe it's really sick or something. But species tend to look for survival at any means necessary, and we do that every day. But I think what Wayne is trying to say is that Wayne's coming from a Christian context from the get-go, and the Christian context offers a particular hope and solution to this thing called death, and what philosophers call the chaos kampf, the struggle against chaos. And in Wayne's context, he's the fact that Jesus was with open arms embracing death, and through that destroying death. Wayne rests his assurance in the notion that ultimately, when the dark night does happen, when you're on your deathbed, he will not, he will pass gracefully, and I think it's part of the famous saying. Look, I think it was John Wesley who said it, or maybe Spurgeon. Look at how a Christian dies, when he was speaking at a funeral. So, I can think of verses like 1 Thessalonians 4 and 1 Corinthians 15, where Paul makes similar arguments like that. And maybe, William, if you want to reflect back on that, if I'm on the right track.
No, General, I get your point. You even got it so much I'm stuttering even trying to recall it. But one thing I would ask is that, is it better to live in heaven than to live on, in the planet like our lives now? Heaven, I suspect, would be a better version of this, right? It would be total, like, vacation or ecstasy. You're living in paradise. Would you be comfortable with saying that heaven is a better place to live than the earth?
Well, I can't. I hate to say this. I can't say if it's better or worse, because I have to stick with the fact that whatever that theosis experience is, even Paul himself would say, I can't describe it. No man has seen, no ear has heard what's the. But you could.
Are you also by collaterally? Are you also then saying heaven could be worse than where we are right now? Because if you're saying, or the same, it could be worse or the same.
No, I'm saying,
if you're not saying it's better, it's like, you're kind of saying the opposite.
No, I'm saying those terms, like better and worse, are anthropological terms associated with the way we experience the universe at the moment, currently. So this is something totally other, which, when you look at Revelation 21, which is all about what that new experience will be like, well, it does mention descriptions about no need for sun, moon, stars, no death, no entropy, and so on, which means radically new physics. And obviously, just by that alone means that we can't put it on a scale like, okay, we can rate what we're experiencing now, say 60% rating, and the heaven experience is like 99.9% rating or something. No, we can't associate them on scales like that.
But I think that would be just honestly a little disingenuous, in the sense that I think most 99.9% of the people, if you ask, is heaven going to be a better place than you're at now, they would say yes. Because even when people do pass away, you'll say at least they're in a better place. They're going to the better place. No one says you're going to a place that we really can't describe. People expect heaven to be paradise as it is described in the Bible. So, I thought this wouldn't even be a point of contention. Would you say that heaven is a better place than the earth is now? If you're saying no, that's not the case, then, and you're saying, well, what does the word better mean? I don't know. I would say grant me some charity in this argument.
Yeah, I'm not denying that. I'm just saying it's a surface level response to someone who asks you that particular question. It's like a quibble. It's just, oh yeah, no, don't worry, paradise is good. Like, it's a better place. You've gone to a better place. No, I think the person, obviously, like a Christian who dies, is obviously in the presence of the Father, which is something that no creature can experience. Even the angels have to cover their faces. But that's the whole point of theosis theology, is that in Christ, you are able to then be face to face with the Father, just as the Son is face to face with the Father. So therefore, that experience, I can't just in some non-reverent way just say, oh yeah, that presence is, it's better than what we are experiencing today. No, this is something totally other that I can't put a rating to it until you experience it.
See, I don't know, General. It seems to me that even with this concept of heaven, and maybe you're speaking from your own perspective of it, but I would think generally most Christians would expect heaven to be a paradise, where the lion is eating grass instead of this. And I would say a paradise where you don't have to work every day, where you can spend time with your family, where you don't have to suffer. Suffering is gone. These are things, this is how heaven is described. It is not described as a place where, people really can't evaluate it. It is described as a place of ecstasy. And I think you're trying to change it into something more nebulous, may be good for a purpose. But, I just, when I was a Christian, and when I speak to other Christians, the goal is to get to heaven, because heaven is such a wonderful place. It's not like it's, kind of ambiguous. And I would just say, you know, if we're going to, if we're having this argument, and I'm just saying, do you think heaven is a better place than we are right now? I would expect you to grant me just a little bit of charity, because I would suspect if you asked 99% of the Christians on the planet if that statement was true, they would say it's true. But now, you know, this argument, because we don't want to give up the word better, you know, let's give me some charity here, you know.
No. I think you're the one that's unnecessarily drawing this out. If I was speaking to my grandmother at, you know, God forbid, her deathbed, and she asked me that question. Now, she's not that inclined philosophically and theologically. So yes, I would say yes, you're going to paradise. But in a tongue-in-cheek way, if I was speaking to like a professor or a philosopher or something, I would give the other response. That's my point.
Yeah, I think General's point here is mainly that when we talk about things like better or worse, we're talking relationally to where we're at now. And his primary point, as far as I'm understanding it, is that you can't really use those words to describe heaven, because heaven's not on the same sliding scale, so to speak. You know, on the scale of measurement in relation to where we are now, you know, we have better, which is like paradise, like a Hawaiian vacation, or, you know, something like that. We have worse, but heaven's just, it's on a different playing field. You know, it's
exactly,
you know, football and baseball. It's completely different. So it doesn't make sense to use the word better.
I don't know.
That would probably be the best approximation.
I'm vehemently disagreeing with you, because the description of heaven from the Bible or from the source material doesn't seem to be this ambiguous place that we really can't judge on some particular scale. It is described as a place. It's described as paradise, and when you describe something as paradise, I'm assuming that they are weighing it against things that are not paradise, that things that are messed up, that are like prisons and things of this nature. When you can make this type of comparison, it's going to be more like this than like that. And right now, I don't think we can say that we're living in a paradise. I'm pretty sure. Now, even though the word paradise may be subjective to each person, you know, for some people this may be their paradise. But if we're just having an honest conversation, when we talk about something being better and this word paradise, then yes, we would be talking about heaven being something that is better in relation to where we're at now. And I would just ask you to grant me that.
Let me just put it this way, then. If we were in a Muslim society at the moment, having this exact same discussion, your version of paradise from a Muslim's context would be what the Quran teaches, and that is virgin women, endless sex, endless, you know. So what I'm saying is, it's curious to see the difference between the way the Christians and the early church would think about, you know, quote unquote paradise versus the other religions, because the other religions, which is technically what you're doing here in this discussion, you're having an anthropological definition in regards to the experience. So, I'm expecting heaven to be paradisical, and you're thinking immediately of human experiences and human elements and you know, relative to suffering and how not to suffer and so on. That to me I find quite curious amongst the, you know, religions of the world, whereas the Christian message is you're going to be in direct fellowship with the Trinity, and obviously in that context I can't imagine the Trinity to be, you know, painful or like some form of like hellish type existence, but it at the same time it would be completely other. It won't be, so I won't turn to someone like what Muslims would do, and I wouldn't turn to someone and say, okay, in heaven, when you experience the Trinity, you're going to experience 72 virgins. You know, you're going to experience endless wine, and you're going to experience I'm going to bring down that total other experience down to my level, to my imagination of what I think paradise is. And now, notice the ramifications of this. That means any person, so take, you know, all the 7 billion people on this planet, they each have unique subjective definitions of what they think paradise should be. And therefore, I mean, to be extreme here, there are some people who consider paradise to be what other people consider not paradise. So Christianity very carefully differentiates the difference between anthropological
but
imaginations.
can I respond to that? If you guys have ever
Yeah,
watched
sure.
the Twilight, if you guys have ever watched the Twilight Zone,
Hold on. He didn't finish.
I thought he did. I asked him, could I respond?
No,
He said,
but
"Go ahead."
Are you done?
yeah, no, I'm pretty much that's pretty much my point.
Oh, did you
can go
finish?
ahead.
I'm sorry. I thought he said go on, but can I go or no?
Yeah, you can go ahead.
Oh, I don't know if you guys have ever seen the Twilight Zone. In the Twilight Zone, they had this episode in which a guy he dies and he goes to a place, and the place
Never heard of it.
It seems to be fantastic. You know, he goes to a casino, he wins all the money, he has beautiful women, he's just doing all these great things that we would consider to be successful. Becomes very rich, very, very famous, but he gets bored. He gets bored with just winning every day. So he goes and robs a bank. He doesn't get caught. You know, then he gets caught and they just let him go. So he becomes his personal hell. And then he asks the angel, he said, well, listen, can you send me to the other place? This place is just no good for me. And the guy said, well, you don't know by now? You are in the other place. This is your hell. Now, I would think of God, the God of the Bible, as described, being omnipotent and all powerful, would be able to create heaven to meld into such a way where it's heaven for everybody. Your heaven or your paradise or your peril, it's going to be different for each person. But I would believe by using the word paradise, it would be an individual thing. A paradise for one person would be different than a paradise for the. I believe your God, as described, can do that. I wouldn't limit him to say he couldn't do that. Now, in which manner and way he does that, that's something that's up for debate. But if you're saying that he has the attributes that he has, I don't think that's outside of the realm of possibility that he can put that heaven could be that type of place. So then I would still ask, if it's just subjective and this word paradise that is used in the Bible to describe this place has really no meaning, then what are we talking about? Because it doesn't seem like the heaven is a real place.
I don't know if you I think you misheard me. I never said that God accommodates the subjective perspectives of paradise of each person. That when each person goes up to heaven, he's like, okay, I'll give you your particular version of paradise and you your particular version. No, there's a particular paradise that we will enter, and Oshiwawa posted the scripture in the site. But that particular paradise is no human imagination has thought of. That's the point.
Yeah, I would also say to give something to MP. When Christians talk about God, we are talking about someone who is goodness, who's benevolent, you know. And so in that sense, when we're in the presence of God, we will be in kind of an objective goodness. So it is paradise in that sense. It's good in that sense. But in terms of actually identifying what that goodness looks like, that's what General and I are talking about being in a whole different realm. We could picture the best possible thing we can picture, and I guarantee you it's going to be better than that. It's going to be something we could not have imagined. I mean, yeah, we may think we know what we want, but it's like a child. You know, when a child thinks they know what they want, but in reality, as a parent, you may have something better in store. So that's all we're saying. So yes, it's good in that sense, in that God is benevolent, but it's not, goodness as in whatever we can imagine now, that's what heaven is. It's something completely different and separated from that.
Could I say something? Something important to note is that the scriptures talk about afterlife. What happens is that we have a vision of God, and that's what causes the paradise, because God is the ultimate good, which we are seeking as rational creatures. And the reason why heaven's totally other, at least in that aspect, is because we've never seen God. Nobody's ever seen God, so we can't really describe what God is. And that's what 2 Corinthians talks about whenever he says saw ineffable things or heard ineffable things. It's about God himself and his nature and his essence. But we haven't observed that. And that's what we're talking about, or at least what I'm talking about when I say heaven's totally other than what we have ever experienced, because we've never experienced God.
I thought Midnight was going to say something.
I have no idea why Midnight just started breathing really loudly. But
Oh, sorry about that.
Oh, it's all right. I was just gonna say, General. I'm surprised you actually didn't bring up the fact that Christianity doesn't necessarily say people are going to live in heaven. Like, people think the goal is live a good life and then you die and then you go like into the clouds. But like Christianity, it gives a two creation model. So there's this first creation, and then there's the new heaven and the new earth. So I'm kind of surprised you didn't bring that up.
New heaven and new. I do want to ask.
I guess I didn't need to mention it, but I agree with that model, Wayne. I think it's very clear that we just have to wait for that to happen. That's the only difference, is that we go along kind of like Ecclesiastes. The sun rises, the sun sets. Nothing new under the sun, all that stuff. It'll just, the universe will just evolve as it should. But until God, in His wisdom, then decides to wrap up what we experience, to then bring about that new creation, then it's quote unquote paradise. Like now we're in that full state of theosis.
I can't let you get away with that, General. What does paradise mean in that context? Like what do you mean by paradise?
Like basically what 2 Corinthians 12:4 says, things that cannot be expressed in words and that no human being has a right to even mention.
So
in this life, I can't explain it to you.
So comparing that paradise to the state of affairs now, which one is more acceptable to you? Which one would you give preference to?
Well, I'd give preference to the new one because there is at least a clue given when John says that there's no more sea, and I'm not meaning an ocean in that context. So yeah.
So you'd give preference to, but why? Because it's a better state of affairs, or because it's just
because of that phrase, there's no more sea. At least that's a hint.
So it's better than it is right now, right? We're agreeing with that.
Yeah, because of that phrase. Yeah.
Okay. So just so we can get past that point, heaven, as described as with general with all those conditions that he applied, it's better than the state of affairs now. We would agree.
Yeah.
And then if we agree with that, then we would agree that the only way to get to heaven is through death. But death and what is it? Like when I was a Christian, I used to believe you had to do two things: repent for your sins, and you had to accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. And then would that like suffice to get into heaven, or do you guys believe that there needs to be more?
That would suffice in regards to 1 Corinthians 15 verses 1-4. Pretty much that as long as you believe that Jesus died according to the Scriptures, was buried, and rose again according to the Scriptures, you're saved.
So if someone who's done that, usually when I was a Baptist, we would do that and then get baptized. So at that moment, we'd ask for forgiveness, stated publicly that we believe Jesus Christ died for our sins, and he was, no one got to the Father but through him. So at that point, let's say even when I was baptized, if I was killed at that point, right after my baptism, right when I believed that, would that have been a better position for me at that point than I am now? Because at that point, I was a full believer. I believe in everything that we just said. Now I don't believe in any of that. So if I would have died at that point, would I have been in a better position then than if I died right now?
Yeah. You'd be in a better position back then, yes.
So I would just ask one more thing. This seems to almost be kind of a death-inspired cult. And what I'm saying is that the fact that it would have been better for me to kill myself after I was baptized.
Wait, did you say suicide, or did you say you died? Like which is it?
But seems to be different than the space where I'm kind of am now, where I'm trying to say I want to live to learn as much as possible before that clock runs out.
No. One second.
If that clock would have ran out there,
did you say?
You admit that I would
second.
have been in a better place than I am now.
No. 1 second. Did you say that you'd suicide if you became a Christian, and that you'd be in a better place?
No. What I'm saying is that I didn't say anything about suicide, because suicide
because I'm pretty sure you just said if I killed myself.
So I'm not suicide. I'm saying if I would have died at the particular point, it doesn't have to be suicide. Some illness could have befell me. I could have gotten into a car accident. Anything could have happened. Where at that point I would have passed away. And I'm saying at that point of death, it would have been better, as you just agreed to, for me to have died at that point. Then they could have drowned me, for instance. Then if I would have died now, not believing that. So it almost seems like right at that point when you truly believe, you should just be honest with you, something bad should happen to you, because if it does, then you are going to go to heaven at that particular point.
I would not probably disagree with that.
Yeah, I don't see how any Christian would agree with that. We're not saying, or we're not giving any credence to the experience of death, like we should just shove it under the rug or something. I mean, Jesus himself wept when a person dies. But what Christians at the same time will rejoice over is the fact that, "Oh death, where is your sting?" That famous phrase in 1 Corinthians 15. That in Jesus, your position before God is such that it's a given. It's 100% fact that regardless of when you live, what experiences you have, and so on, you will die. We will all die. Everyone in this hangout will die. But what's the solution to death? What's the solution to chaos? And Jesus is that solution. If you reject that solution, then it's you're the boss of your own temple, which is your body. If you reject that solution, then you accept to fall into chaos after death, and that means alienation. That's literally the biblical message. Yeah.
I'd also like to point out that on Christianity, the end goal is not just heaven. For a mature Christian, at least, the end goal is the relationship with God. If I spent my entire life, following God, seeking Him, becoming close to Him, and then I died, and for some reason He didn't see fit to let me into heaven, I would not regret any moment that I spent serving Him, because that is the goal. The goal is the service to Him, not the end result. I mean, at the bottom line, any Christian who knows their theology will admit that even at their best, they aren't deserving of heaven. Heaven is a gift, and so heaven isn't the end goal. So to die, like you said, if I just converted and died, I may get heaven, but I lose out on that maturity and that mature relationship with God, which is actually the ultimate goal prior to any type of gift with regards to heaven.
Well, I have to vehemently disagree with you, because I think the ultimate goal generally of Christianity is to avoid hell and by consequence you get into heaven. So to say that it has no bearing on the faith, and we even see this play out with things like Pascal's wager, where people are saying, well, what the hell? What do you have to lose? If you're wrong, you're dead and you're gone anyway. But if you're right, then you get to go into heaven. So I don't understand this. It's not really some type of motivation to believe in the faith, and it seems also to have this compulsory aspect to it, where if you don't believe, you're going to go to this place where you're going to be tortured forever, versus being, paradise forever. And that type of that coercive part of it seems to be unnecessary, because if this is the truth and this can stand on its own as that having that power, then I wouldn't need to believe it because I'm fearing hell, or I want to go to heaven. I would be believing it because it just happened to be true. And if it happened to be true, then there would be no reason for it. It's like me believing in the theory of gravity. I don't believe it because of any compulsion. I believe it because the evidence kind of bears it out. So this coercive part of it seems to scare me about the faith, and say, well, are people really believing this, or are people really trying to avoid the consequences?
Yeah, but
Sam, I don't know. Do you want to say something?
I would consider. Yeah, I was gonna say I think those are two different, like completely separate things or like topics. So I mean, you could give it that Jesus is God and etc. But you do know there are denominations of Christians who don't even believe in hell. Some Christians believe in what is it? Annihilationism.
Annihilationism.
Yeah. So I don't know. I think those are two like completely different like topics. Because Christianity could be true, but then some Christians could just say they don't believe in hell or whatever. So
the fact of the matter is, MP, is regardless of who you are, humans have always. I mean, you could involve like an evolutionary, understanding of this. Like if you see a snake, your natural inclination is to run away or something because it's embedded genetically. The grand question is the arrow of time. It's one direction. It's tending more and more towards chaos. Chaos keeps adding to itself. It's like if you have a black hole and you're near the event horizon, and just as you pass the event horizon, you're at the point of no return. You're just gonna slowly, your feet will go in first, and then the rest of your body, and you'll be spaghettified. So, is there a way, to use that black hole analogy, is there a way to escape the event horizon? Is there a way for, in this case, light to escape, even though it's trapped? And that grand question of, well, the answer is it's impossible to escape. Curiously, Jesus himself says that. He says, for humans, this is impossible, but for God, all things are possible in regards to salvation and what it means to overcome death and chaos and all that. So if God exists, what's the most efficient means? And the most efficient means he's gone about and he's created the universe that encompasses all the things that we experience that can then give us the experiences of life, ranging from the good and the bad. So, but in the midst of that, how has he interacted with this universe to then ultimately provide a direct solution to those particular questions and problems? And not only that, but through that act where he then brings about this thing called theosis, so that his own like quote unquote family or followers through that will then experience a direct fellowship in paradise, something far beyond anything we can imagine. So what religion and what model of reality has provided the most efficient and best explanation? I don't see Islam providing that. I don't see Buddhism and Hinduism providing that. Buddhism is basically Hinduism, rehashed in a different way. But as far as I can tell, Judaism, which then led into first century Christianity, is the most reasonable model to explain
generally
all these issues.
You're picking the best. You're picking the best loser out of the models that all don't really work. It's like if just because these are bad answers doesn't mean it's also right. I'm not, and please don't take that as any disrespect. But if you have a whole bunch of bad answers, you say, well, I'm going to accept this answer because it's not as bad as the others. Doesn't really tell me that yours is right.
No. It's a clean slate for everything. It's like different cosmologies to explain how the universe functions. You can have steady state model universe models, and you can have lambda CDM Big Bang models. The point is that what comports with reality, what makes the most sense, what actually that it can solve the problems, it can actually answer questions that are generated.
But that was based on let's not forget the distinction between steady state and the Big Bang was evidence. He was like, here is the evidence that we're presenting, and that evidence was.
The thing is, there's no evidence for steady state.
Hold on,
that's my point. It's model reality.
Big Bang made predictions, and like for the inflationary model that made predictions, and those predictions were verified through like microwave background radiation and some other things that
yes.
have
So,
come
the,
to
so
pass.
exactly.
So
So,
we're not talking about
what prediction?
We're talking
One
about
second.
these models are bad and this model is good, because if you're talking about settling that with evidence, then you have to provide that evidence.
Yeah. So what predictions did the Old Testament provide in regards to what was in the mind of God through the Old Testament prophets in regards to, here's how I'm going to solve this. Like, for example, you can look at Isaiah 52 that leads into Isaiah 53 about the suffering servant and what he will accomplish, and the ramifications of what he'll do, which is obviously everything that the Christian gospel says. This is 700 years prior to the gospel. Then comes Jesus as a suffering servant, and he does exactly that. So you have a model of reality already given by God, and it actually then happens. Just like a model of reality, theoretical models of reality, that then when we start to put it to the test, the predictions come true. And the predictions are not static, it's ever evolving, because the universe continues to change.
It's funny.
Yeah.
This I don't know. I was reading I forget what paper it was, but it was on the history of Christianity, and it mentioned a point about, remember when Jesus rode the donkey into the temple, and the reason why he rode the donkey into the temple was because the prophecies kind of said that this is how the king of the Jews would ride into the temple on a donkey. And it was interesting because most scholars believe are unsure whether he rode the donkey as just to fulfill a prophecy, or he did it because the prophecy said that he would do it. In other words, you didn't know what was it really fulfilling prophecy, or was it someone who just read the prophecy and said, well, this is what the person in the prophecy did, so I'm going to perform this act here, henceforth fulfilling the prophecy. Because it seems like that could have been the case. If you're talking about something that we knew that would be prophesied for 700 years, then at a point someone says, well, hey, I know what's going to happen, so let me fulfill this act, and then say that I fulfilled this prophecy.
Yeah, that donkey prophecy actually is a lot older than 7. Like you're talking in Genesis 49, verse 11, 10 and 11, speaks about the one who will come under Judah will ride a donkey, and his clothes will be like trampled in wine, grapes and drenched in wine, and so on.
But do you agree that Jesus knew of that prophecy? Do you agree that Jesus knew of that prophecy?
Oh yeah, he did. But no one, not including the angels, so no one except God understood the cryptic nature of these prophecies. The point about the prophecies is that he didn't do these things just to fulfill the prophecies. What the prophecies that we now in hindsight understand, when you look at it in a different way, not just as prophecies, when you actually look at the themes and the context and the ramifications of what's being mentioned and why they're structured the way they are, those are things that Jesus is finally embodying in his mission to bring about that ultimate culmination of defeat of death and suffering, and hence resurrection and life.
You have to agree that the prophecy was to say, tomorrow, if MP crosses the street, he's going to be king of the world, and I get up tomorrow and then cross the street. Does that make me king of the world? Or if
but that's very trivial.
that I don't know about,
then
makes that prediction, that would be something different. And that's what I'm saying. Just because I can know of a prophecy and fulfill that prophecy, it's different than me not knowing that prophecy exists and fulfilling it. Even there may be some coincidental way that it could have happened, like the Icarus story, but generally you can't do that.
Now you've taken the importance of those prophecies as being very trivial. It's not just, oh, look at me show off, I'm going to inspire this prophet to make this prophecy and voila, like the prophecy is fulfilled. No, it's not about that. It's actually a lot deeper than that. So,
somebody else wants to jump in. I'm sorry.
Well, wait, keep going. I'm interested. Don't stop now.
Yeah, so I mean, when you look at Isaiah 52, for example. Okay. Let me just go back to Genesis 49 for a sec. So you look at the the 12 tribes of Israel under those 12 sons, they each are categorized with certain names. There's a particular son, Judah, that's given a particular like a summary statement by the dying father. This is what's going to happen to you, and so on. And cryptically, none of these people, don't forget, none of these people thought of Jesus. Okay, so when Isaiah was speaking about Jesus, like we understand it to be Jesus, he wasn't thinking of Jesus. He was thinking of Hezekiah, or like Daniel 9. Like Christians like to look at the 70 weeks of Daniel, that the prophecy fulfills to the day that Jesus dies. Okay, great. But in Daniel's context, they were thinking of Nehemiah. The point is that there's a historical context associated with, these prophecies and these statements. God then uses that to bring about an ultimate theme so humanity is doing their thing, right? You're seeing humanity, history progressing forward in time and so on. But God has a much bigger problem on his hands, and that is this deep question that we constantly ask, the meaning of life. Is there a solution to death and suffering? Is there a new creation that can bring about this ultimate good?
General,
he's using all of these things and amalgamating it all together in the person of Jesus, in the way Jesus performed, like the way he spoke, the way he acted,
but
his sacrificial love, and so on.
Maybe the point I was trying to make was one of, in terms of, maybe I confused you, because I'm trying to understand how the points that you're making go back to the point that I originally addressed, and I think it's simple. The simple fact of the matter is things that we agreed upon. We agreed upon that Jesus knew of the prophecy of going into the temple riding the donkey. We said Jesus absolutely knew that point. We said Jesus knew the day, the time, the hour. So, for instance, it's possible that he could have said, well, hey, tomorrow I'm supposed to be on that donkey at 12 o'clock, blah, 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 so I can prove that I'm the king of the Jews. Let's not mess this up. Let's get it done. Get me a donkey. So at 12 o'clock, I'm going to be there. We'll have the donkey about 9 o'clock, Jesus. Don't worry about it. You'll be riding up there at 12. No doubt about it. Something unforeseen could happen, but you're going to be there. It's like, that just seems reasonable to me, especially if you knew what the prophecies were going to be, to kind of just fulfill something simple as that. So the more supernatural stuff, yes, I would agree, would be, we'd have a point of contention there. But I'm talking about just something like this doesn't really seem to have a supernatural component that could be real verified, because like you're saying, when you were talking before, you were talking about the actual prophecies being made. And hey, I won't even argue against that. I'm just saying if I know, like in my example before about me crossing the street, becoming king of the world, if I know tomorrow, if I were to do that at a certain time, that people would believe that, then guess what? I would do that in fulfillment of that prophecy, even though there wasn't really the spiritual component of it. It's just me making a choice to fulfill the prophecy at that time.
Yeah. But Jesus is not. One second. I'll just quickly.
Go ahead.
I put this in the side chat for you, MP, what Paul says. So Paul actually brilliantly summarizes what I'm trying to get at. That God, he has, his creation is genuinely free, genuinely sentient to make choices. Now, he, at the end of the day, no matter what happens to the creation, he's not going to get affected because he's God. If the creation goes into complete chaos and just complete, it just sniffs out into existence, how does that affect God? Well, it really doesn't. But God, being joined intimately with his creation right from the start, and hence this notion of what the Hebrews call chesed love, like agape love. In fact, to be a little bit cringy here, to use the movie Titanic, when Leonardo says, "You jump, I jump." Just, I don't know why that came to my mind, but that's probably the clearest example where God's like, I'm going to be with you in this context. So keeping that in mind, he knows that that yes, this is a creation, and I'm sovereign over the creation. But at the end of the day, to allow for genuine freedom of will and choice, the creation can actually upset my plans. So what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 2 is that the secret of, resurrection and the solution to death and so on is a secret, because if the people understood it, and in this case even Satan, if Satan ultimately understood it, the crucifixion would not have happened. And hence, because the crucifixion is the solution to what I'm getting at, the death and so on. So, yeah, Jesus knew that. In fact, that when you read the Gospels, he keeps saying, "My time has not yet come. My time has not yet come." And then randomly he picks up a donkey and says, "Do this, do that." He rides in, does what he does, and then a week later he's killed. Now, in hindsight, I find it all fascinating. Like, it's just evidence that Jesus is divine. I can go into a Muslim discussion and say, just on that point alone, you guys have no argument. Jesus is God. But that is not meaty enough for me as a Christian. What I like to do is go behind the scenes and realize the themes associated with the imagery. In this case, he didn't come in on a horse. He came in on a donkey.
That he knew he had to come in on, because he knew if he'd have came in on a horse, things wouldn't have been right.
The point of this,
I think the point that's missed though is, so like how we always talk about, we need to look at things from an ancient Near Eastern perspective and blah blah blah. And so like MP today in the 21st century, you're saying, oh my gosh, like he would have known about this prophecy, so he could have plagiarized or faked it or whatever. But like 1,000 years ago, like somebody who also didn't believe in Jesus and wasn't a Christian, they wouldn't bring up the point you're bringing now. Their point would
no, but it's not. It's not.
Wait.
It's not that. I'm trying to say that these stories transform your character, and what AJ was getting at, and that is your relationship with God. How you perform in this reality as an imager of your Creator, like an Imago Dei. And so therefore the donkey story.
That wasn't.
Yeah, I was just trying to. Yeah, but I was just trying to emphasize to MP that's what he should be.
What I was saying is it's weird how today the objection you gave MP is that, like, I don't think at that time would have brought that up, so they probably would have said something like Jennifer said, oh, he came in a donkey, how come he didn't come on a horse? Or I think the bigger picture is that he came in on a donkey and people were worshiping him because they thought he was going to take down the government and kill everybody, and he actually didn't. Like that's the more ironic thing, and that's actually more of the, you could say, embarrassing thing about the Gospels, where you have this meek little, like, what was Jesus, a carpenter, rotting in on a donkey, and people are like, oh my gosh, he's going to overthrow the government and blah blah blah. And so if you are a skeptic in that time period, your objection would have probably been, he rode in on a donkey and we thought he was going to kill everybody, but instead they killed him, and that would be the ironic thing.
No,
exactly. So as you can,
I don't hold on. I do want to respond, because I let Wayne respond so I can respond.
And then after that, I would like to address MP's point.
Go ahead. You go ahead and address the point, because I know you three wanted to address the point, and I just wanted to respond to these points.
Yeah, because I don't think, in terms, although I think General had a point, I don't think it addressed the question you were specifically asking. And so I think the question that you're asking, I think, almost turns these prophecies into something they're not supposed to be. I think even in the example you gave, where you said that if MP, let's say that there was a prophecy saying that I don't know, the ruler of the world would cross the street hopping backwards on one foot or something like that, and you knew about that prophecy and then you did it, right? Would that prove that you're the ruler of the world? Absolutely not. But what it would do is it would prove that you're making a claim to be the ruler of the world. Knowing that prophecy is there and specifically fulfilling it would tie you, at least in your attempt to identify yourself as that ruler of the world. And so I think in that case, these prophecies, yeah, Jesus may have known about them, and he wasn't trying to prove to anyone that he was the Messiah by riding in on a donkey. What he was doing is identifying himself and saying, yeah, that dude that you heard about, that's me. And so he wasn't proving anything, so to speak, but he was identifying himself. And so, whether or not that proves that he's supernatural or proves that he's the Messiah, I think is ultimately irrelevant to the point that was trying to be made, which is identifying himself as the person that would fulfill those prophecies. And so, I mean, as far as proving that he's the Messiah, I think the resurrection did that, the miracles did that. I mean, even early Talmudic writings like identified Christ and said, hey, something's going on here because he's performing miracles. It must be a demon. So there was other things happening that would prove the supernatural element. I don't think that was the purpose of those prophecies. I think his purpose there was to identify himself. And so in that goal, I don't think him knowing about it ahead of time would really change anything.
Well, I must respectfully disagree in one major aspect of it. And the fact of the matter is that even when we started the discussion, General Han Solo and then Ochiwa, to just a minor extent, Wayne to even more, we're bolstering this particular evidence of foresight and this particular thing of here's something that was prophesized in the future that did occur, that was fulfilled, showing a supernatural aspect to the whole process that someone, Isaiah, for instance, was brought up in a couple of verses from Isaiah, being fulfilled later on with the Jesus account. And my objection to that was, well, okay, if we're talking about prophecies and predictions over time, then in this particular prediction that seems to once like to be used to show this supernatural aspect, this was my this was my rational way of thinking about it in terms of what would likely happen if we were to just think about it in a regular manner.
In that case, I would probably agree with you.
How would that generally work? And when I made my objection, just saying that if someone does know of the prophecy and then tries to fulfill that prophecy, you're right. They're trying to say, I am the ruler of the world. But then I think that objection would go against what General was saying in terms of it being this kind of evidence for this supernatural claim versus just, hey, this is him just saying, I know the story. I'm doing this because I am the guy. The thing is, in one instance we're using it as proof. In the other instance, we're saying it's not just proof. It's just something.
I wasn't even using that. I wasn't even giving you apologetics. I wasn't like trying to prove to you Christianity. I was just saying that the whole prophecy thing and just was slipped in because of models of reality. What's the most efficient model of reality? And I use that as an example where based on what was already pre-written, that came true. That wasn't my main argument in regards to the original topic that we were discussing. It was one facet, is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, that's cool. Well, it seems like, I don't want to beat this one to a dead horse, but do you guys want to move on? Because I know Wayne said he had a couple other points earlier that he wanted to go through.
Yeah. Well, we actually had some people watching, not a lot, but nonetheless, we have people watching. But one thing in particular, so it's relational to our discussion, at least to the point I was trying to make, in the sense that I don't think somebody who lived 2,000 years ago would try and make that point as an objection against Christianity. So it's kind of interesting how even the objections to Christianity have kind of evolved over time, because the same questions we have there, they're not really questions that people would have asked back then. I don't know, people today would say something like, I don't know, how do you know the Bible hasn't been corrupted or something like that, or how can we trust the shit? That stuff wasn't really stuff they argued about, because people just it was cultural. People just knew. But in the same sense, speaking about death, I guess I would like to talk about how even the understanding of death and sin has evolved over time. Even as it relates to the Genesis account, because I know today you talk to a lot of younger creationists or fundamentalist Christians, and as far as I know, their understanding of Genesis and death and etc. People used to live forever, and now they don't live forever. and the punishment for us sinning against God is God has caused us to physically die. Where me and my understanding of the scriptures, I don't think God caused us to die as a punishment. I don't see it as a terrible, evil, bad thing. God uses death so populations can change and evolve over time. So I don't really see it as a contention. So I guess I'll open up the floor.
Well, here's one thing though. If you don't think that God, if you don't think that God wanted, or say if you don't think death is a bad thing, then why at the afterlife is there no death? Because I mean, Jesus even says that there will be no marriage in the future because I guess because there's no point in bringing forth children when we're living forever. So it doesn't really work, I don't think.
I think it does. I think God he uses death for his overall purposes. So the one reason God will use death, of course, in this life is number one, because people don't live that long. That actually makes people want to seek out God and want to seek out a higher purpose and a higher cause for life. You ever see most people when they get like a bad diagnostic from a doctor, they say, "Oh my gosh, I'm going to die. Let me go and find God," or whatever. And so God can use those certain things to draw people closer to him.
Well, yeah, I agree with that.
That's pretty cold though, Lane. I'm talking about, just to find me, you're gonna have to be the terminal illness. Come on. He could just kind of show up and be like, "Hey, I'm kind of here."
Well, he's just saying that.
Here, not you have to get cancer.
But he's just saying that that bad things can have a good effect, and
right.
And I agree with that. I just don't think. I think that I think that death was the punishment for sin. And I understand there was death before that, but I mean, you can interpret that as saying, there were death, but it wasn't death of human beings before that, because Adam and Eve were the first human beings, and that's how I'd interpret it.
You know what? I actually have a different interpretation of that. I think there was, of course, physical death before Adam and Eve sinned, and I think when they got punished, I think the type of death in the Genesis account is talking about a spiritual death where it's a separation from God. So that's how I would understand.
Well, I think that's part of it, but yeah, I don't think that's all.
Yeah,
of it.
the whole pre-human, pre-Adam sort of thing. It'll be interesting to hear your thoughts on that, Archie. Well, I don't know if because I hold to that view as well. That
yeah, I just
Adam and
think
Eve weren't the first humans. So,
oh, you don't think they were?
No.
No.
So you think so you're talking about like an evolutionary process over time?
Yeah, I think that I think that what the scriptures talk about, whenever it says that Adam and Eve obtained the knowledge of good and evil, I think that was them becoming human. That was them becoming conscious and having the ability to recognize who they are and just think like a human being rather than just acting based upon instincts. It was them obtaining free will as well.
Well, Alchi, I would disagree because I think the Bible makes it very clear that before they ate that apple, they were human, as in the common sense of the term. I don't know,
but I don't take it literally.
Well, there's two things, Archie, that surprised me when I was thinking very hard on that topic. The first thing is what fascinated me to discover was the Hebrew word yetzer in Genesis 2:7. It says that God formed, or he yetzered the man from the dust of the ground. Scholars before the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, scholars were like, there's a misspelling in the Masoretic text because yetzer there has two yods, and it would confuse scholars as to why, because it's an unnecessary extra yod. You don't spell yetzer with two yods. You just need the one yod. So, with the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Dead Sea Scroll, funnily enough, if you want to call this providence, a particular scrap that survived. It was literally a scrap big enough just to preserve that one particular word. Obviously, in the context of Genesis 2, and that scrap also includes the two yods. So at least as far as textual transmission is concerned, the spelling remained. Like, so the Dead Sea Scrolls had that spelling, and the Masoretic text 1,000 years later has the same spelling. Then they started to discover Second Temple literature that conjectured on the fact that the two yods in this context is some form of, later on it would be like a Kabbalistic, mystical interpretation that the two yods mean the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination of the humans. So that means Adam was already embedded with the free will capacity to do good and evil. Now, on top of that, recently scholars have looked at Romans 1. So Paul in Romans 1 seems to, like in hindsight of this stuff, seems to actually be thinking about Genesis 1 all the way through, up to like Genesis 18 and 19. And so when Paul says, for all they knew God, but they neither glorified him, but gave glory to the four-footed beasts and so on, Paul is actually thinking of that fall taking place. And so therefore the whole eating of the fruit in Paul's thinking in Romans 1 is this idolatry that was actualized. And so quite curiously, Paul then becomes the standard by which how to interpret the fall and what was happening in the garden. So in that sense, it improves upon what you were thinking, which, forgive me, is that like a Roman? Does that come from like a Roman Catholic tradition? That type of understanding of the way Adam is.
It's my personal interpretation. I haven't looked into this. Okay. I need to look into it more, but this is just my personal interpretation right now.
You have more of like a progressive creationist type of interpretation. I like it.
But yeah, that's literally the extent of my research thus far. That Paul seems to define what's going on in the garden in Romans 1, and at the same time you have this fascinating conjectural, perspective of Genesis 1, 2, and 3, pre-Christian commentaries and so on, and yeah.
Well, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I don't really think we even need a physical historical Adam. I mean, you could throw it in the mix or whatever if you're trying to argue like for the Bible like a scientific text or etc. But I think it's doing too much. I don't really think we need like an actual Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve could just be representatives of like the entire human race or something. It doesn't really matter to me.
Well, I basically agree with you. I mean, it could have been a population, say, right? I don't think that it was, but that's one interpretation I've heard, and I'm sure, and that is consistent with the Catholic position. But it has to be. I think it represents the first people that sin. That's the way I see it, and there had to be a first person to sin.
I see it as.
I'm sorry, I was going to say, with you being a biologist, how do you reconcile that view of Scripture with evolutionary theory?
The reconciliation could happen easily if you have a pre-Adamite hypothesis, but with a real Adam individual. There's complete harmony in that context.
I understand you can have a real Adam and accept evolution, but how do you reconcile the fact that there were first people to sin? Because with evolutionary theory, there are no first people. There are just populations of people that come about.
Well, there still had to be a first person to sin. It's not like you can have gradual. It's not like you can have like gradual sinning.
This is where the notion of Adam as Israel typology. So if Adam is the high priest, he's now the first human high priest that represents all of humans at the time, relative to God's abode in Eden. If Adam falls, all of humanity falls. That's the whole point of that at the end of Genesis 3. Look, when God says, look, mankind in the plural, mankind has become like one of us, knowing good and evil like you. So
Right, but I still don't see the need, or I still don't see like a prime sinner, like first sinners. I I don't think with the way
it's an
what
archetypal position. So Jesus is called the last Adam, but does this mean that Jesus is the last man ever to live? No, it's an archetypal position.
I think Wayne's objection is he's saying, why is there a need for the person of first sin? Oh, this person to have sinned the first. And Wayne, I would say this. I would say this is because the Bible has made it so when Adam sinned, all his children all his children are kind of damned into this sinful world. And that's one, like when him and Eve were kicked out of the Garden of Eden, his children weren't born into paradise. They were born into a fallen world where they were born into sin. And that's why we are born into sin. And being born into sin means that you need to be cleansed. And the only way you can be cleansed is through the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. And that's why he had to come back to save us, because based on Adam's first sin, everybody after him was corrupted. And since everybody after him was corrupted, Jesus needed to come back and wash that sin away with his blood. And then that sin being washed away, then mankind could then achieve paradise, but only through this method, because Adam's disgrace.
Well, but Wayne, I don't understand, how is there supposed to be like a gradual sinning? I just don't understand how that works.
In my view, with humanity coming on the scene as a group rather than like first humans sinning is just a result of being human. It's not something where you have these humans come about and then their brains evolve and then they commit the first sin.
Can I say one thing? I want to make sure it's clear. That's not all Christians' perspective, but generally that's what was my perspective when I was a Christian. So I'm not sure if Alchiwawa or anyone else in here who happens to be Christian also subscribes to the same view.
I think your view is quite common. Definitely, because I've heard it before. I think in my mom's church, so it's not something foreign.
Yeah, I mean the idea is that it's that this first sin sort of kind of imputed something on people that made them less able to it's called original sin. It's something that makes them less able to achieve to be good people, basically.
Yeah, but so with me, I don't believe in original sin. I don't think there was an original sin. However, I do think that people are born with the capacity to sin, and I do think people are sinners, but I don't think there was a first sinner.
But do you agree that sin requires you to have like free will in order for you to sin? Like your dog doesn't sin.
Right. Yeah, I would agree with that.
I disagree. I think your dog does sin. Like when I used to have a dog and that motherfucker used to jump on the couch. That was sin. It was sin because I told him not to do it, and he knew not to do it, so he was sin against me.
Well, yeah, okay, but I think we mean something like there's a higher culpability for human beings, obviously, because they're they have the ability, they have a better ability to understand what's going on.
A better moral.
But I think the free will. The problem is with Christianity, the omni-God, it eviscerates free will. It's like, especially if you have this temporal God that is timeless, that really does eviscerate any concept of free will. But I think it's not, Christianity is not the only one that has a problem, because if you do take it from a naturalist standpoint, they have the same problem with free will, because free will is just a response to stimuli. So your responses are based on your experiences, which are based on the input. So any input, you're going to respond a certain way, and that could be programmed. If we understood all your experiences in the past, we could predict how you respond in the future. But I think Christianity has that same problem. If you have a God that in the future knows what you're going to do, then it can't really be any other way. If he knows that you're going to make a left turn at this particular light, you must make that left turn. Right turn is not available to you. Or even going straight, you must make a left turn, because if you didn't make a left turn,
yeah, I think that's
would be eviscerated. So the compulsory aspect of it is undeniable. So I don't know how you get free will.
Yeah, I think that's a misunderstanding of God's eternity, because God, you can't talk about God knowing things before they happen, because God is timeless. He encompasses all of time. For him is at once. It's at one for him. That's the way that God's timeless. So God actually sees what we're doing in the future for him at the present. It's for him, our future is present to him, as well as our past.
What you just said. So right now you're saying the future is locked in. So is there anything in the future that you can do differently? Because like you said, he observed it all in the present. So the future, that future is already done, based on what you're saying. So is there anything in the future that you can change? Because if it is, then God doesn't know it yet. But if it's not, then you're right. Exactly what you're saying is right. God sees it all in the present.
Well, I would like to add a different perspective. I mean, I'm also a Christian.
Hold on,
I have a different view.
I did ask him that question, just because he made that point, which I think is fatal. So that's why I wanted to see if he could address it.
Yeah, go ahead, Archie.
So our free will is based upon us not being determined by anything to act. That's what it's based upon. So yes, God knows that how we will act in the future, and we can't act other than the way that God knows that we're going to act. But the reason it's free is because it's not determined by anything other than our own will.
I don't know how you can make that statement when it's like in one sense you're saying it is determined, because you said, yes, God does know how we're going to act in the future. But that speaks of it being determined, but maybe in the moment. So it's almost like, you know what, and I would agree with this. You're making the argument for an illusionary free will, a free will that, yes, in the moment we believe that we do make these choices, but the fact that God knows what choice we're going to make doesn't really have the aspect on our psychological being of us making a choice. But the fact that
that's not what I'm saying
for us seems to give rise to this fact, because if God already knows what the choice is going to be made, then you have no choice. You have to do what he already knows is going to happen.
The problem with free will only comes if God is determining what we're going to do. If he knows, because he's like looking at the way that our chemicals are aligned right now, and he can predict how, based upon those chemicals, what's going to happen in the future. God doesn't know what we're going to do in that way. He's not determining what we will do in the future. He's seeing presently what we are doing in the future.
So quick question. If God knows that you're going to wake up tomorrow morning, does that have to happen? Do you have to wake up? If God knows that you're going to wake up tomorrow, does that have to happen? Do you have to wake up?
Yeah.
Then how is that different than if God knows that tomorrow at 1 o'clock you're going to make the choice to go left versus right? You must go left. How is that different than the previous scenario where God knows you're going to wake up? You have to wake up, because in one, you understand the compulsion of it. You have no choice. But in the second one, when it seems like you have a choice, but you really have a compulsory act to go one way, you're saying, no, you really have a choice.
Well, think about it this way. Like, if you observe me talking to you, I mean, you're observing me talking to you right now. And the fact that I'm saying these words right now means I cannot do otherwise, right? But it doesn't mean that I'm not freely doing it. It doesn't mean something's determining me to talk right now. And the same goes with the things that I've said in the past. You know, I can't change what I said in the past, but it doesn't mean that something determined me, because that's the criteria of something not being free. It can't be solely my will that's causing me to act in this way. There has to be something external to me directing me in a certain direction.
So let me put it in context of the present then. Your response to this, whoever's going to respond to this, God knows what they're going to say. God knows how you're going to respond. God knows what points you're going to make. So whoever's going to respond to what I'm saying now, If you respond, it's because God is compelling you to respond. And if you don't respond, it's also because God has compelled you not to respond. Now, I ask you to respond.
As a Molinist, I would disagree with that. I would think that you actually have it backwards.
Yeah, I'm a Molinist as well, and I just want to say, I think you're asking not the wrong question, but you're asking the same question differently. So, for example, if I said, why did you make tea, right? And you said, well, I made tea because I went to the stove and I turned on the stove, and due to combustion, the fire had lit on the stove, and I put down the teapot, and due to, I don't know, the laws, the thermodynamics, I was able to make tea, and boom, like that's why I was able to make tea. And another answer you could give me that is just as reasonable would be, I was thirsty. So I mean, I think you're asking the same question in different ways, or at least you're looking for, I guess, separate answers to answer the same question. So, like,
Well, just to clear that up, my question has been very specific from the beginning. I assumed, but just so we can be all on the same page. My question is that Alchi has put forward that we have free will, and my contention is that we do not have free will if you have an omni-God who knows what you're going to do. And then I gave the example, this very specific example, of you going to an intersection and God knows that you're going to turn left. At that point, is there anything else you can do? Then I also gave the example of Al Chihuahua waking up the next morning. If God knows you're going to wake up the next morning, is there any other way it can be? And he astutely said, yes, I must wake up. And then I said, the last example is that if God believes you're going to do X or sees you're going to do X, is there any way you cannot do X? And we all agree that you must do X because it's already been seen. God knows what you're going to do. So I made the analysis that it seems like you don't have free will because whatever you're going to do in the future is determined. And I challenge anybody here to prove that they had free will by doing something that God doesn't know they're going to do. Because if you can do that, then your will is truly free.
But MP, determined by what? Determined by what?
Also, that's a false dichotomy to say, prove that you have free will by doing something God doesn't know. You're subtly insisting that God can't know if it's free, and I reject that as a premise. As a Molinist, I believe that God knows everything that's going to happen by way of divine counterfactuals, but the causal agent there is me, not God.
But even in what you just said, right now, if God knew you were going to hit the lottery tomorrow, is there any way that you cannot hit the lottery? Now, even though you said it's kind of factual, it seems to me that the answer would be no. You're going to hit it no matter what. Whatever needs to happen for you to be successful in that would happen tomorrow. So then if we put it in those contexts, your free will seems to be in that same context because you're making a choice tomorrow. You make choices every second, but tomorrow you're going to make some choices. And those choices that you made are going to be already known by God, what choices you're going to make. So it's my contention that you have no choice but to make those choices in the way that God says you're going to make it. So that's what, and my challenge is that really free will? Is your will really free if you have no choice but to only go one way?
But I do have a choice. That's where we disagree. I mean, for instance, let me give you an example of like me and my wife, right? Let's say I give her a choice between, I don't know, eating at a Mexican restaurant or eating at a seafood restaurant, right? If that choice is available to her, I can say with 100% certainty that she will choose the Mexican restaurant. Why? Because I know her intimately. And in the same way, God knows his creation intimately. And so not only does he know us intimately and knows what we would pick in any given situation, he knows the order of the cosmos intimately enough to know exactly the situation we would be put in. And so as the designer of the universe, someone who knows the exact situation we will be put in, combined with the knowledge of our exact inner workings and knowing us intimately enough to know what we would do in that situation, he can accurately predict with 100% certainty what will happen at any given time without actually determining it to be so.
Well, AJ, I do. Hold on. I want to respond to AJ's point real quick because I think his analogy was flawed in one major way. And the major way is that the analogy isn't really complete. You're talking about when you talk about the restaurant, your person going to a seafood versus a Mexican. Let's say that is true. Let's say you have the option of seafood versus Mexican. But then we have to really put it in the context of what God actually knows. God knows that the person's allergic to seafood, number one. God also knows the seafood restaurant is closed and won't be open. God actually knows that the only restaurant they can go to is the Mexican restaurant because it's the only restaurant open in the town. God knows that they both know the fact that the seafood restaurant is closed, that she's allergic to seafood, and the only restaurant they can actually go to is the Mexican restaurant. That's how close this relationship is. There is no other way to go but to the Mexican restaurant. And that's the situation I think God puts forth when we're thinking about just the everyday scenarios. There is nothing else that we can do. So the compulsory part of it, I don't think you can avoid. You are when tomorrow, when you wake up and you do a particular action, that action must occur, because if it didn't occur, then God's foresight of that action today would be wrong. And since it can't be wrong, you are compelled to do it. And if you're telling me that compulsion is not there, then I would beg you to say that if you're telling me that he knows what the future is going to be, then how is that compulsory not achieved based on that foresight? Because if he knows what you're going to do, you have no choice but to do it. Because if you didn't, he wouldn't know.
Because I think the arrow is going in exactly the opposite direction. I don't think we do what we do because God knows it. I think God knows it because we do what we do. I think the arrow's in the exactly wrong direction.
Right. I would say the same thing. I think in a sense you're thinking of it, MP, is when we do these certain actions that God fulfills, or even like Achiwa would say, God is the one determining it. But even it puts it this way: God is able to have his fulfillments through the random actions of his creation. And so through all of these different random events that go on in the universe, it's not that God causes these things to happen, but God he achieved his overall purposes through these random actions in the universe.
Well, hey, I'll defer because I understand. I don't want to keep making the same point, but I think you guys are looking over the point.
But MP, let me just ask you
that if I go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I just want to ask you, like, what is so you're saying that our will has to be determined because God knows what we're going to do. So determined by what?
I'm saying if we just logically think about this and just divorce ourselves from the religious aspect of it or the dogmatic aspect of it. If we're talking about every action that we perform is known by a particular super being, and I like to give the example of whatever you're going to do tomorrow, whatever event you're going to do tomorrow, understand that this being understands each and every event, each and every choice you're going to make, and knows it as of right now. So I disagree with the arrow going in reverse, because the arrow is definitely going from where we're at now to the future. And if right now that being knows all our decisions, so we all agree on knows all our decisions that are going to be made in the future, 5 seconds from now, or 2 hours from now, or tomorrow, for sake of argument, tomorrow, then I would ask, well, is there any way it can be different? That your choice to do something can be different. Can you choose not to do a particular event tomorrow that has already been ordained right now for you to do? And from everyone's response, they've said no. You must do those events. Now, it's true that God knows it, and we're trying to play with the fact that he knows that you can do these events or you can't do the events. But the fact of the matter is, no one has disputed, is that those events must happen in that particular way. And if we don't do them that way, then this God doesn't have foreknowledge, because he wouldn't know right now what you're going to do tomorrow. So, but based on that demand of logically, that must happen. And if we're saying that must happen in that particular way, then where's your choice? But you have an illusion of free choice, but you actually have no choice at all.
Let me put it this way. Say that instead of turning left, we turned right, then God would know, right? God would know that we chose to turn right rather than left, and vice versa. Or if I chose not to wake up tomorrow morning, God would know that. So God only knows what we are going to do because we willed to do it. So it doesn't seem to negate free will, because it's still based upon what we will do, based upon what we choose to do.
I think free will is being used in two separate ways because you're talking about free will as in action compared to free will as a random mishap. For example, something you can't control, like a piano falling on you. So that's free will used in one way. But then there's like another sense of free will where I freely choose to do something opposed to walking into a bad situation.
That's the way we've been using it. I was under assumption that that's the way we were using it. I'm sorry if anybody thought anything different.
Well, it seems like you're using it in two different ways, because I could will to get up off the couch opposed to a random action I can't control, like my house crushing me. Well, of course, I wouldn't have any control over that situation.
No, I'm only talking about choices that you make. Tomorrow, you're going to make a whole hell of a set of choices. And each one of those choices, you agree right now, God knows what choices you're going to make. And the only conclusion that we can make right now, if you agree with me that he knows right now those choices you're going to make tomorrow, then right now I'm making the assumption that you are compelled to make those choices. Those decisions that you're going to make tomorrow, you have no choice but to make them in that particular way. Because if you didn't, God wouldn't know them. Now, we may not know them in this room, but you know them. But
if we didn't, we would know. God would know.
Wait, guys, wait. One person talking at a time.
I'm just saying, if we didn't do what God knew we would do, God would know, because God only knows because he sees what we're willing.
How about we take it down a notch and all right. So disregarding people and the free will choices of us Homo sapiens, what about something as simple as like a trash bag blowing in the wind? Could that trash bag have blew in any other direction? If God knew it, I could.
No, if God knew what was going to happen, it could absolutely happen no other way. Because if it did, then he wouldn't know. It's by even the question raises the contradiction of if God knew it was going to happen that way, then there's no other way it could happen, and that's the negation of free will.
Yeah, I don't think that follows. But go ahead.
Go ahead, Ouchie, if you want to go for it.
I was just saying, I don't think that follows, because it follows that since God knows what we're doing tomorrow, it's present to him. Like he can see us tomorrow acting, according to my view anyway. It follows from that if we were to do something else, God would see us doing that other thing. So I think you have it backwards. It's not because God knows that we're doing something that we do it. It's because we do it that God knows we're doing something. And in that way,
but Ouchie, how would you address that now? Because now God knows what we're going to do in the future. Like how would that work in the situation that we're in right now? Tomorrow, God knows what you're going to do. Every particular event, every choice that you make, God knows. Now, if you're saying right now he knows that, then what choice do you have but to make those same? Could you choose not to do that stuff tomorrow that God knows what you're going to do?
Yeah, I think that's.
Then I would say you have free will. If you can't, then I know that God knows. Then
I think that's where you're making the mistake. To say that God knows right now is a mistake to some degree, because God's timeless. And what it means for God to be timeless is that God is present in the future and now. Everything that is present, all future and past events are present to God right now. For God, and I'm kind of using this language in an analogical way.
No. This is actually the B theory of time. You're espousing the B theory of time. All events have occurred, and God can see all events. But even that destroys the free will argument even more, because now if you're saying God can look at it just kind of like this plank and say, "Hey, all events have happened. There is no choice but to do it," then you've now more or less eviscerated free will, because now there are two reasons why there's not free will, because God can see the events, but the events have already happened that we cannot change. You can't change a future event if it's already put in the B theory of time.
It's not quite the B theory of time, because
in in this analogy, are there random actions that at least lead up to that decision? Are there random events that take place?
Hold on, let me let Alshi speak, because Alshi was going to respond to my point, and I hate when somebody has something on the tip of their tongue, and because it sounded like you were going to say something good.
I'm just saying it's not the B theory of time. It is similar, right? Because it's more the theory of God. It's more like you might say the B theory of God, right? So God is not divided according to before and after. All it before and after is something exists now and then it doesn't exist in the future. That's how we measure before and after, and that's not there for God. God is wholly complete and without change throughout all time. So you can't talk about God being before and after. So for God, everything is one. Everything is he sees everything at once for God. But that doesn't mean that in our reality that things don't actually change, right? So I wouldn't call it to be a theory of time. And even if it was, I don't think that the determining factor is whether or not things can change. The determining factor is whether or not we are determining what we're going to do. Like if our will is determining it and we're not determined by something else. And I guess you're right that we'd have to be able to do otherwise. But so like in the B theory of time, you're right. In the B theory of time, like we would be doing this action in the future and it would never change. It couldn't change. But what I'm proposing is different, because I don't think that the future exists now. I don't think that. I don't think that the past exists now. I think that it's present to God, and that's because God's timeless. So it's a little bit more nuanced than that. So the future exists for God because God is not divided into these different parts. Yeah, it's kind of hard to explain. But
yeah, I would disagree with Ouchie as far as God and time. I don't think God is timeless currently. I think he was timeless, and now he's entered into time with creation. But that's besides the point. I think ultimately we're mixing up could and would here, because as far as like the bag flowing in the wind that Wayne brought up, could the bag have flown in a different direction? Yes. Would it have? No, because of the laws of physics. And so, I mean, it's with the same thing with us. You know, could we have turned right instead of left? Absolutely. But would we have is the question. And I don't think that's the case. I think with God's knowledge of counterfactuals, he knows what we will do. It's not that he makes us do it, but that he knows what we will do because of his knowledge of us intimately. And the same thing with his knowledge of creation as a whole. And so it's not a matter of we could not do different. It's a matter of we would not do different. And so, see, that's the difference. If we could not do different, then I would agree with you that, yeah, that may be a violation of free will. But I don't think it's that we could not do different. I think it's that we would not. And I think that allows free will to remain intact.
I'm curious to know, AJ, was your answer in relation to your Molinism? Because if so, I like.
Yes.
If God's in time, though, wouldn't that make him imperfect?
No, it just depends on your view of time and what the nature of time is. And so for me, I see time as kind of a measurement of duration. And so I think, you know, God existing prior to any sort of creation, there's no anchor point for time, right? And the moment that God created, then there becomes an anchor point, and you can now measure backwards. So I think once God created time, he entered into it voluntarily. But I don't, same way that when Jesus became a man, he entered into flesh voluntarily. I think that when God created time, he entered into time voluntarily. But that, I mean, that's a whole different theological discussion. But
would you agree that God doesn't change?
Yes. Yes. I mean, essentially, he doesn't change essentially. Obviously, he changes in some regard because Jesus wasn't incarnate at one point and then he was. But essentially, the essence of God doesn't change. So yes, I would agree to that.
Right. Okay, well, I think we basically agree. I just would define time differently than you.
Yeah, I think it's just a different view of time, but yeah, I mean, which wasn't my point. Wasn't that I disagree with you? That was just I just mentioned that just to show.
Well, I mean, we've been on free will for a while, so I thought it'd be interesting.
Yeah. I mean, my main point wasn't to disagree with you. I was just distinguishing that there's multiple views on the panel here, but ultimately, my main point is a distinction between could and would, which I think for Molinism at least, it's an issue of would, not could.
Oh, this discussion has made me want to go to a library and find out more.
Well, this has been a great discussion, and please, I apologize if I I do not mean to offend. I'm just challenging these views. So please, sometimes when you're talking these particular ways, people think you're challenging their theology, and I'm not just challenging the logic behind it. So please accept my apology.
Yeah, no problem. I mean, that's kind of why we're here, right? If we're not here to discuss it, then we can leave. But no, I think that's why we're here. So I have no problem with it.
Yeah, same here. I mean, I came here to have my views challenged. That's why I'm here.
I like the entire discussion. But with that being said, I'm about to go to bed. It's getting a little late, and we've been talking for a long time. But thank you all for showing up, and hopefully we can continue to have these graceful dialogues.
Thanks again for the discussion. This is actually fun. It was interesting to hear the different views too, because I kind of gotten to the point where I kind of thought everybody had the same type of viewpoint, but to see the even disagreement, it makes me think that we're all thinking about this thing logically and just come to different conclusions.
Right.